So, good afternoon, everyone. Today is the day you've all been waiting for. Today is the podcast on the War of the Three Henrys. And more than that, this is the story of the French Wars of Religion, and how that period of violence is going to set the stage for developing in France an absolute monarchy. So I want to talk about the dynamics of France, its political role, how it's distinguished from other areas of Europe at this time, Western Europe, and how the Reformation is definitely one factor, how during this period leading up to the year 1610, where we really see this period of chaos, and really up to about 1661. We're going to really be looking at the development of absolutism and what are the roots to the most famous of absolute monarchs, Louis XIV. Louis XIV is going to become officially king in 1648. So right at that marking point of the end of period one. So what I want to do today is sort of trace from the Valois kings to the rise of the Bourbon dynasty in France. We're going to talk about the dynamics of France as a country, as a nation, and how it's able to be so significant and relevant in European history, despite its chaos, and the effects of this chaos and the rise of the famous ruler Henry of Navarre, and the Edict of Nantes, which is going to play an important role in the dynamics of Louis XIV as well. So to get started, I want us to take a moment to really look at this map that's before you. This is showing the various wars of religion from 1547 to 1610. And you can see the Habsburg regions that we've been talking about in class. You also can see here that there's a few different groups within France itself. Right? You have the Catholic League in the northern region, and that's ruled by the Guise family. Guise. And then there's the areas of Huguenot control, which are further in the southern regions. And if you can see here in the very lower southern region, there's an area called Navarre. That's going to be where the Bourbon family is from, and they span France and Spain. And then in the northern region, we have the Guise family, where they're going to be really ruling. And then beyond those two places, then beyond those two places, in the very central region, we have the Valois still in control. And so this is the whole region. France was one of the first real areas where turmoil is going to be breaking out in these wars of religion between 1560 and 1660. So in the 1550s, religious divisions are really by class. More so than anything else. The wars of religion in France are also wars of politics and of power, maintaining control of power. The nobles and the capitalists are mainly Huguenots. They're Calvinists. The name Huguenot, or Huguenot, is after a guy called Bensacoun Hughes, who is the leader of Geneva political revolts in the 1520s. The Huguenots, though, are a form of Calvinists. John Calvin himself was of French descent, and so he has the heritage of the French, and so it does spread quickly within France. France, as a Gallican state, the Gallican system, it already was fairly separate from the papal regime. So when we look and see the spread of Protestantism in France, it's only the extreme that really get attracted and get spread, because that's the radical breach. You won't see like an Anglican version of Protestantism in France, because it's too aligned. The political motive there isn't there like you would see in Germany, because the Pope doesn't have the same power. The Gallican Church is sort of its own entity. The clergy are not going to be in rebellion in France. Instead, you'll see these merchants, some of the nobles, who will be attracted to the more radical and more type where the economy sort of supports it as well. Peasants are predominantly Catholic. And so within that reign, we have the three different noble families sort of competing against the Valois monarchy. You have those Bourbon Calvinists, the Huguenots in the south. Then you have another group called the Montmorency and Châtillon. Those are also a Protestant group that's more in central France. You have the Guise, who are Catholics, and they are by far the strongest of the different groups and the noble families. It's a very strong group. The niece is actually Mary, Queen of Scots, and family members were high-ranking generals or also cardinals. The Guise family was very influential in French society. And so what you end up seeing is the Bourbons and these Montmorency, Chateaubriand are going to be leading a Protestant resistance movement. And so it's really more politically the reason why they'd be involved is because they're the anti-Guise. So why is Calvinism so popular in France? There's more than 2,000 Huguenot congregations by 1561. But 1/15 of the population is Huguenot. So it's not a huge population that is Huguenot, 1/15. However, out of that 1/15, 2 out of every 5 of the aristocracy is. Aristocrats are sort of hoping for some kind of peace of Augsburg settlement in France, where Calvinism could serve as a form of political decentralization for these nobles to be able to acquire more power. So that's why you have the aristocrats sort of attracted to it. It's once again much more political in France than you would see how the Lutheran religion sort of emerges in the Holy Roman Empire. So the new monarchy in France, the Valois family, is going to have some kind of unity and administrative centralization. Francis I, who's the last of the Valois, he is strong enough to protect France from Charles V, so it's not going to be ruled by Charles V. But his extravagant living does drain French finances. He's going to be going to make massive building projects where he'll be building the Chateau of Chambord and Fontainebleau. He builds the Collège de France for education. But he does also extend the Gallican church system at this point where the Catholic Church is so weak. He takes advantage of that. And so he extends that original pragmatic sanction of Bourges, which established the Gallican Church, with a Concordat of Bologna, where he agrees to recognize the supremacy of the papacy over a universal council, so no longer a conciliar movement, but instead the Pope. But in return, the French crown is having the right to appoint all bishops and abbots. This is a way that Francis I can make some wealth and some money, and the French can pick their own priests for their churches, and they're able to sort of remove themselves from the papal domain. Francis I is also going to be targeting Protestants as a way of extending his own power. So in 1534, Protestants start plastering Paris with these anti-Catholic placards, and there ends up being these mass arrests of Protestants. In 1540, there's the Edict of Fontainebleau, which subjects Protestants to Inquisition settings. Now, Francis's gains do get undone by weak sons. Henry II, his son, dies suddenly in a jousting match in 1559, and Henry II had a son at the time who was 15 years old. This is Francis II. This is the man who's married to Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots, and this is when Mary Stuart has to then return back home to Scotland. And he dies after only 17 months ruling. Now, Francis II is going to be, his mother then really ends up taking a strong role, Catherine de' Medici. Catherine de' Medici is of the Medici family in Italy. She's bringing to France, actually, she's given a lot of the credit for bringing French cuisine to France. A lot of the cooking styles and traditions that we associate with French cooking, it actually originates from the Medici family style of wealth and opulent living that you'd see in Italy. So there's a claim that the French cuisine is originating in Italy thanks to Catherine de' Medici. Not only did she bring a lot of culture and Renaissance flair to the monarchy, she also is going to bring a lot of the intrigue that you would see in the past. So Catherine de' Medici, her first son, her eldest Francis II, dying as a weak young boy, her future children are also going to be sort of dominated and manipulated by her. And she is sort of the de facto ruler. And Charles IX, her next son, is going to be only 10 when king. So the mother really does become his ruler. You have to be the age of 14 to be able to have the age of majority to be the ruler itself, outright. So Catherine de' Medici's personal goals is to maintain the prestige of the monarchy, to weaken tensions between the noble families, and to maintain peace as best she can. As a way, in order to sort of weaken tensions between noble families, the Guise and Bourbon families are really at odds with one another, and she's going to try and play those two sides against one another, sometimes to her own detriment. And so the Guise family, because they are so strong, she's looking for ways to weaken them. And so the Guise family, they are the ultra-Catholics in France. And they have a Catholic League where they are out actively trying to fight against and resist the Protestant spread of Protestantism in France. They have support from Spain. And so for Catherine de' Medici, she's viewing the Guise with extreme suspicion and almost with a desire to stop them in their tracks. Along with that, so Catherine's starting to look for some kind of alliance with the Bourbon family. And the problem is the Bourbons are Huguenot, so she can only be in an alliance with them to a certain extent. In 1562, the Guise family ends up massacring Protestants, which sparks a civil war. Now, civil wars, when I say that in France at this time, it's not like the United States Civil War where we have North versus South and sort of organized battles. These are rebellions outright within various towns, widespread chaos, not quite as organized, where the nobles themselves each are having their own private armies that are making allegiances and carrying a banner on behalf of a certain group and then going ahead and fighting someone else. So it's much more loose, much more chaotic than what we traditionally think of as a civil war. So in 1562, the Guise family massacres Protestants. We have the Civil War. The Huguenots, however, do not automatically side with the monarchy. And so with Catherine de' Medici, although she wants to in some ways align with herself with the Bourbon family, she now is forced to side with the Guise family. She then attempts to have some kind of edict of toleration where Protestants will have freedom to worship publicly outside of towns, although privately within them. And then she also passes a Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which is acknowledging the power of Protestant nobility and the freedom to practice their faith. It's an effort to try and maintain peace. It's not going to be successful. She's really caught between extremes, the Guise extreme on one hand and the Huguenots extreme on the other. Catherine wants to have a Catholic France, but she's afraid if she enforces that Catholic France, the Guise will be able to dominate. And so an alliance with Huguenots, though, would mean an alliance with Protestant resistance in the Netherlands, which would then also automatically mean war with Spain. If you can remember, the Spanish do need to have access through France in order to get to their Spanish Netherlands, and so there is this desire to also avoid that conflict at all cost. So you can see that there's a series of different conflicts there, and the Spanish do have a presence here in the Burgundy region, and they're going there too. So Catherine de' Medici is sort of prickled there. She doesn't want to go to war with Spain. It would also include the Habsburg dynasty as well. All of these things are sort of going to build into this period of tension, and Catherine de' Medici ends up siding with Catholics and Charles V. So all of these different tensions between the Guise and the Bourbons and Catherine de' Medici and the Valois line sort of pit in the middle of it all culminates in this terrible moment as depicted in this image of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. This event starts in Paris, but then becomes a widespread event that occurs all throughout Europe, all throughout France, and then will even spread beyond France throughout all of Europe. So what's happening here? I want to go back to that family tree one more moment, and just point out to you, Charles IX, who's the current king, is being led to align himself with the Bourbon family for political gain to try and weaken the Guise. While he publicly is doing those things, Catherine de' Medici is privately making alliances and allegiances with the Guise family. So Charles IX is not aware of what his mom's sort of plotting behind his back. At the same time that this is happening, his younger sister Margaret is getting married to Henry IV, a Bourbon, Henry of Navarre. That's the guy that we're going to be talking about. So that wedding is happening. Now, Charles IX is getting along quite well with some of the Huguenots. Catherine de' Medici plots the assassination of one of these Huguenots just a few days before the wedding of Henry IV and Charles IX's sister. That wedding is occurring in Paris. And so the Huguenots who are invited to come and attend this wedding are invited to Paris, but they have to agree to drop all arms and all weaponry. And they leave that all behind. So they go into Paris with the understanding there will be a peaceful time, a time to celebrate this marriage. However, Charles IX is also now sworn to investigate who attempted the life of his good friend, who is a Bourbon. Catherine had convinced Charles IX that a Huguenot coup was about to occur, and that's what all this movement was happening. And she convinced her son, Charles IX, that only a swift execution of Protestant leaders could possibly save the crown. 20,000 Protestants are going to be killed all throughout France in response to this. It becomes this massive sweep of people who are murdered and slaughtered. And Catholics in the streets of Paris, which was a very strong Catholic stronghold, get swept up in that bloodthirst period of time. And they also are slaughtering all of Henry of Navarre's family. Now, Henry of Navarre briefly converts to Catholicism at this one moment to save his own life, but much of his family and friends are all going to be killed during this St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Pope Gregory XIII celebrates this massacre and thinks of it as a good thing and a sign that France is going to maintain its Catholic allegiance. Protestants view this time, this moment, this event, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, as this key turning point in its history. It's a rally call. It's used as a rally call that there's a need to fight for survival. And so it starts this Protestant resistance theory that it is just to fight for your existence. So a right to resist is just, that we can fight. And this moment, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, is why we see a lot of increased violence throughout all of Europe with the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. Now, all of this is happening after St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and Charles IX will die, and we have Henry III becoming king. So Henry III here is the fourth son of he's the next in line. He's the next in line. Now Henry III, he's not a strong king. There's stories of many antics with male lovers and many different parties. He's dressing flamboyantly. He's really preoccupied with court life. And so his mother has much greater focus on the throne. Henry III was always surrounded by these mignons, or these male companions who were dressed up in as dandies, always concerned with the costumes instead. Now he's coming to the throne with no heirs. So the next apparent heir is his cousin, Henry of Navarre. So now we have this period of time where there's Henry of Navarre, who seems like a legitimate ruler, and Henry III, who's just sort of flighty and loose. And there's going to be this period of tension. So we have Henry III. We also then have Henry of Guise and Henry of Navarre. There are three Henrys, all three believe that they should be the king, and all three are going to fight for that throne. This is going to lead to the War of Three Henrys. And so in Paris, they are going to the Catholic strongholds of Paris in May 1588 will drive out Henry III when Henry of Guise claims the throne. He says, I'm going to be legitimate and the real heir to this throne. Henry of France, Henry III of France, then he is then driven out of his own palace. He's driven out of Paris. Henry III then in exile, he plans Henry Guise and his brother's assassination. So they then die. The Catholic League under the Guise family then will rise up in revolt. Henry III once again is going to have to run away, and he goes to Henry of Navarre's camp for refuge. Well, then Henry of Navarre is going to have Henry III killed, and then he claims the throne for himself 2 months later. All of that, in summation, France is in a state of civil war from 1562 to 1598. Palmer calls it feudal rebellions against higher central authority. It's just a period of abject chaos where there's no strong government in France. There's no unifying force. The economy is not at all going to be developing. People are not going to feel safe outside of their own village, and people are going to be fighting one another over many different reasons, religion being the excuse for it all. Um, By 1650, France had been ruled only by one actual competent adult monarch. There's little French unity. There's 300 little areas with their own legal systems, small independent cities known as bonnes-villes, sort of like the royal cities in the Holy Roman Empire. Larger provinces like Brittany, Burgundy, Provence, and Languedoc are going to be having completely different kinds of environments. They each are religiously diverse and culturally very different. The language itself is even different in all these areas of France. So there's no strong sense of unity. Out of this, we have this period of time known as the politiques. And the politiques are going to really challenge the notion that religion ought to be determined, ought to determine French unity and France's destiny. And instead, they really are pushing for secularism in order to restore order. Henry IV is a version of this politique, where instead of using religion as a force of division, he's going to say, let's put religion aside, let's remove it from government, and instead let's create a secular society where we can all live civilly and in peace. Later on, Cardinal Richelieu, who's going to be the ecclesiastical leader, but he is a cardinal, right, of the Catholic Church, but also the aide to Louis XIII. It's also going to help strengthen the monarchy's power. Jean Baudin has another theory. He's the one who coins the term politique, and he's really in favor of a strong centralized power to help unite and fix France. We need to make France strong. So this notion of politique becomes the pervasive idea that helps solidify that rise of absolutism in France. So I want to take the moment now, so we see sort of how we have the climate of this period of civil war. Sorry, I know it's confusing, but the intrigue, it matters. And I want to now just talk about Henry IV and his reign. So Henry IV in 1589 becomes King of France after both Henry III and the Guise threat are assassinated. So now he is the sole Henry to claim the throne. He is the first of the Bourbon line of kings, and the Bourbon family is going to be the last ruling family in France until through the French Revolution. Now he is Protestant, and the Catholic League had appointed the Cardinal of Bourbon to be King Charles. Henry IV instead fights for that title. He's a really effective king. He's going to be restoring order and prosperity. He's going to appoint a Calvinist, Duke of Sully, as the chief financial minister, who's going to really enforce a strict form of mercantilism, using the colonies in the New World, particularly Canada, to have strong source of some natural materials. Also, that's a system of mercantilism. He'll have monopolies over gunpowder and of salt, and he'll help use that money and wealth to build new roads and bridges and better infrastructure throughout all of France to help unite France and increase its trade and internally make it a stronger area. Henry IV's big claim, or his goal, is to be able to have enough wealth that there can be a chicken in every pot on Sundays. Sort of make sure that every peasant, every person in his country benefits from this period of peace and establish enough prosperity to have meat at least once a week. Now, Henry IV will never, throughout his time in power, call the Estates General. He doesn't give up power for himself. He increases centralization. And instead of having those 300 little areas, each with their own legal systems, he will divide France into 30 different generalizations, or generalizations, each with an intendant, someone who's appointed by the king to communicate his rule. He's going to sell those government jobs and offices, and so you have this new nobility of the robe versus nobility of the sword. The nobility of the robe are your rich merchant class who are going to be able to buy these new government jobs, and they become this new social elite. They're nobility because of their role in the government, but not because of their blood. They're lesser only to the nobility of the sword, or those landed nobles who own land because of their title, who've inherited that. In terms of foreign policy, Henry IV is going to have a strong role. Philip II still is very present in France. He's going to still have the support of the Catholic League, Philip II of Spain, and he'll hold territory in Burgundy. And so with that tension with a Catholic presence that's very much posing a threat to the unity and strength of France, Henry IV feels the pressure to convert to Catholicism. And in this way, he's going to get the support of the people who were anti-Spanish, that they just were attracted to Philip II because he was Catholic. And with that, he's able to go to war against Spain and win. And therefore, there's no more Spain in France. In 1598, to now appeal to those very influential Huguenots who now no longer trust him because he's converted to Catholicism, Henry IV passes the Edict of Nantes, a very important document for his reign. It's a document of toleration, but not of freedom. It's not religious freedom, it's religious toleration. Catholicism will be the official religion of France. Huguenots do have some kind of civil rights. They're allowed to fortify their own towns. They're allowed to have mixed chambers in some courts, where you can have in some court systems both Protestants and Catholics. And this is all part of that politique, right? Maintaining order under the crown. Now, Henry IV will be assassinated in 1610 by a Dominican, by a Catholic, who was very angry at his sympathy for the Huguenots. He had lived a life of fear. Henry IV was constantly fearful of his own life. I mean, after all, he had assassinated many Henrys himself. He knew how precarious his position was in power. He always had a food tester. There was always 2 loaded guns in his holster, and he was assassinated in the end of his reign. His son, Louis XIII, then becomes king. And this is, he's too young at this point to be able to be ruler. So Henry IV's wife, Marie de Medici, is the regent. His wife is not as forceful, and an Estates General is forced to be called into session. When it was dismissed, though, no Estates General was called until the French Revolution. Under Louis XIII, Cardinal Richelieu is really the ruler, and it's a very Machiavellian rule. Cardinal Richelieu believes that religious interests must be suppressed in order to have a unified state. And so he calls for what's called the raison d'etat, that religion be subordinate to the state. His 4 main goals: to eliminate Huguenots, to remind nobles that they are inferior to the king, to give France some nationalism, and to make monarchy absolute. In order to do this, he's destroying the fortresses of nobility. He's not allowing them to have any private armies or private fortifications. He destroys the fortifications of Huguenot Protestant towns. And he also uses commoners as intendants and nobility of the robe, rather than employing any other higher nobility than that. Now, Cardinal Richelieu is also going to establish peace with Spain. And during the 30 Years' War, he's going to side with Sweden and the Protestants as a way of weakening the Habsburgs. Once again, he's acting in the interest of France first, without completely ignoring religious ties and any other kind of context there. He's going to be strengthening the economy using mercantile policies as established by Henry IV. He also puts down a Huguenot rebellion in La Rochelle, France. So here's La Rochelle in 1627. There ends up being a rebellion there of Huguenots resisting against Cardinal Richelieu's policies. And Huguenots are allowed to keep their religion at the end of this rebellion, but they lose all political power. And Richelieu amends to restrict political rights of the Huguenots. And what he also does is he destroys their cities. So here, if you see modern-day La Rochelle, France, the one thing you'll notice is the remains of some of their fortified walls, but not a lot of their walls here. Later on, when we have Louis XIV, he will altogether revoke the Edict of Nantes. In 1642, Richelieu will die. In 1643, Louis the 13th will die, and Louis the 14th in 1643 will take the throne at only 5 years old. And that is where we'll stop for today. So once again, I know this was a bit of a convoluted story to follow. I appreciate your patience. I hope you enjoyed. All right, have a good day.